Today on Unsolved Florida, we are covering a cold case that authorities now say is solved almost 40 years later. A body dumped in a canal by a potential Florida serial killer. Let's get into what we know. In 1987, Marilyn Decker was 28 years old and her life was taking numerous wrong turns. She had begun working as a vet tech at a local vet's office when she started hanging out with the wrong crowd, leading her to abuse alcohol and drugs about 6 months prior to her death. She was last seen hanging out at a laundromat in Davie near Route 441. On October 22, 1987, Marilyn was found floating in a canal near Flamingo Road in Davie, Florida with multiple stab wounds. Her cause of death was determined to be a homicide by asphyxiation. It was also discovered that she was stabbed multiple times after she had already passed. After nearly 4 decades, new DNA evidence has finally solved the 1987 murder of Marilyn Decker. Since her murder, her family had no answers about what happened to their sister. Now, the Davie police detectives say ex-con Donald Lawless is the suspected killer. This is a terrible photo, but this is the only photo that is available online. So according to the police, Donald Lawless was 62 years old at the time of the crime. The police believe Marilyn was killed elsewhere and then her body was dumped in the canal. Davie police said that in the 1980s, multiple suspects were identified, but as evidence was collected and processed, there were negative results and the case remained unsolved. The investigation continued in 1995 with interviews and more scene items being processed as forensic technology advanced. However, there were no active leads and more negative results, leaving the trail cold once again. Luckily, in 2021, the case was reopened by the Davie PD Cold Case Unit. Possible suspects were interviewed and family members spoke to detectives who had worked the crime scene previously. Police even featured the case on a Broward Crime Stoppers billboard seen here. Here's another angle of the billboard. So in 2021, they sent Marilyn's shirt off for advanced testing, where they found small hairs which revealed male DNA. This sample was analyzed by a genealogist who evidently identified Lawless as a possible match. Donald, who would now be 100 years old, lived in Florida from the early 1980s until 1993. He had a long criminal history dating back to 1940. His numerous charges included burglaries, theft, auto theft, robbery, fraud, battery, and prostitution. He died in Ohio in 1995 of natural causes and was cremated. Just to confirm, police obtained DNA from a close relative of Donald and matched it to the sample from Marilyn's shirt. When she was murdered, Donald lived less than a mile from where Marilyn would often hang out with her friends. Her family believes they might have known one another. Marilyn had been working the streets for money, and her autopsy showed she had recent manicured fingernails and a full stomach. The case was turned over to the Broward County State's Attorney's Office, which determined there was enough evidence to charge him with Marilyn's murder. But that isn't where this case stops, because Davie detectives think that Donald could have been a serial killer. In areas of Florida such as Fort Myers, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, and beyond, there were similar cases of young women found dumped in canals or waterways and killed in a similar manner. Donald was originally from Ohio, lived in Florida, but also spent time in Chicago, Pennsylvania, and California. The detective on Marilyn's case also mentioned that this crime took place when he was 62 years old, which is a very odd age to commit your first murder or your last. It is unclear if the Davie police are working with other local police on those unsolved homicides, but if anyone enjoys researching true crime, unsolved cases, and Jane Does, this might be a good project to take on. I know I don't normally cover solved cases, hence our page's name, but I agree with the police that likely this was not Donald's only murder. I'm glad Marilyn's family got answers, even though they will never get justice. One piece of hope is a piece of legislation called the Decker-Bachman Act will allow families to apply to have their loved ones' cases reviewed after being cold for 5 years. I'm currently researching viewer-submitted cases, so if there is an unsolved homicide or missing persons case from Florida you would like to see get more coverage, please let me know. Until next time, thanks for watching Unsolved Florida.